Hey, welcome to the show. I have a special guest joining me today, Peter King. I've known Peter for a while and I've actually been on his show a couple of times. And we have a whole bunch of topics that we normally like to yap about. But welcome, Peter. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And we kind of had a little bit of a tough time figuring out of all the many, many topics we would love to talk about, what should we focus on today? So we have a list of a few things. They're kind of in line with some videos that I've made recently where Peter and I are both kind of invested in helping people wake up to some of the realities of our world that have been hidden from us bizarrely for, I think, in our entire lives in some cases. So the first thing that Peter and I wanted to discuss, because we've both been through sales training, psychology training, as part of our business world, and I know that you were involved in the Tony Robbins world, and he's one of the masters of helping people understand belief structure. So, what do you kind of see, Peter, knowing you of all the NLP type training you've been through, but what's going on in our current world, sort of political world, but even just the world that we live in, which seems to be bizarre at this stage?
Oh gosh, yeah, many rabbit holes to choose from, but I think at least on the NLP slash personal belief psychology standpoint, understanding words and understanding what words mean. I actually created a presentation a few years ago about the significance of words and how much of an impact the words that we use affect our thinking, affect our behavior, affect our relationships. It affects how we present ourselves, how we self identify. It's all language. And so, as I started to learn more and more about personal development and linguistics and NLP and psychology, the words that we use become a literal program by which we all individually operate and by which we all collectively sort of contribute to create a more collective narrative. And then if you've done a little bit of research like you and I have, where you start to realize that media companies aren't these independent, resources of information, that they are often corporate entities that are pushing a narrative, you can start to piece together direction and agenda and how much of what I think is my own individual critical thought versus what perhaps a corporation or a politician wants me to think, and or what my influence around me thinks wants me to think. It could be mom and dad. It could be a friend, a neighbor, etc. So you start to become more and more aware of the power of words. That was a big eye opener for me throughout all the Tony Robbins and other types of NLP and sales training that I've been through.
So let's talk about the past couple of years in this sort of weird season that began basically in 2020 for the most part. What are some words that have meaning that have kind of been influential in this era?
I mean, a big one, and I don't know if it's okay for us to talk about this one, is the jab, or the V word for the jab.
Okay.
And so, we literally, when people heard that, when people heard, hey, there's this jab coming out, there was a natural assumption by most people that uh, our authorities are telling us, hey, there's a solution to this problem that's out there, and all you
Hmm.
have to do is go take the V word. And there was an assumption that we all made, where the reality is that they literally changed the definition. I think it was the CDC literally officially changed the definition of what that means, and the implications of that are monumental. I mean, they're possibly, you know, life and death type implications when you're dealing with a experimental jab. So that's one for sure. There's so many. Another just real simple one, when you just think in terms of politics, how one side calls something an estate tax and the other side calls it a death tax. You can see that there's an emotional intention to create either positive associations or negative associations. And if you're on the left and you're looking at this rich dude that dies, it's an it's an estate tax. We got to tax that estate. He's got plenty of money. We should be able to have a piece of that. But if you're on the right and you've worked your ass off your whole life and you took a ton of risk and you've been bankrupt 3 times and you built a company and you finally had some legacy to leave to your children, you're basically taxing me to die. So it's all about perspective and emotional association to this stuff. And I find that world to be fascinating. And it's one that clearly is the battleground that a lot of very powerful people are fighting for hearts and minds over right now.
And I've long stated that the cartel who controls media, I think they have the best copywriters in the world. They're incredibly skilled.
Yep.
From cute little phrases like social distancing, 2 weeks to flatten the curve. They always have build back better. I love the alliteration in that one. They always have
Hmm.
some kind of clever little saying, which are words that sound good, sound like something you would want to do, but really are representing something quite different in the true reality. So, as much as I'm not a fan of that organization, I do think they're very skilled when it comes to word usage and
Oh, they're
copywriting.
incredibly skilled. You have to tip your cap, regardless of how you feel about it. You have to acknowledge there's an incredible amount of intelligence that's being portrayed into that. To your point, if you look at the Restrict Act that they're trying to pass right now, well, what is it
Mm-hmm.
restricting and who's being restricted? If you look at the Patriot Act, what are they trying to appeal to? Who are you appealing to within a Patriot Act? Who's going to resist that? And so there's a lot of you have to be able to step into that emotional entanglement and untangle that whole thing and figure out critically, where do I stand, what do I support, but then you have to be willing to face the fire socially, and that is a huge talk about influence. That is one of the biggest drivers of human behavior, is whether or not we are a part of the group. And
Mm-hmm.
we don't necessarily consciously think about this until you go through the NLP training and some of this other personal development stuff like you and I have. But you don't really realize how much of that influence plays a massive factor in your life and in your behavior and the decisions that you make. How many of us hesitate to do something because we think other people might judge us, or how will this look, for my family, or we're constantly thinking about other people might think about our choices. So it's a very, very strong persuasive thing, and then sometimes for good reason, but in other times it can be detrimental if they're trying to, usher the herd over the cliff. Like, no, we need to be critically thinking in that case.
So, related to Tony Robbins, I actually spent quite a bit of time studying Chase Hughes material. I don't know if you're familiar with him at all, but
Mm-mm.
I actually worked for him for a while. He's a behavior profiler and developed a thing called the 6 human needs, which are kind of
Mm.
ancillary to the needs that Tony Robbins has done. But these are needs that people need from other people, whereas Tony's needs are more holistic needs you need from the world. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
one of Chase's 6 needs is a need for acceptance. And this is more dominant in some people than others. And so you can see, and I've learned how to profile people well enough to identify who has an acceptance needs. But you can see that group, it's extremely difficult for them to resist what everyone else is doing. And it creates a lot of societal pressure to comply with things, even if your gut tells you that this isn't really the right thing for me to do.
Mm-hmm.
But the people pulling the strings are well aware of how this works and have utilized this very effectively.
Oh, that might be one of the biggest fundamental things that uh, causes a society to have a downturn or not, is how many people in the society are attached to um, their need for acceptance, their need for that, for that validation. And to me, I think of it as emotional maturity. And so when you have a lot of adults that are still out there, when I say adults, I mean grown people that are still behaving in ways that they need acceptance from others, and therefore they haven't fully emotionally matured, they're far more susceptible to influence and manipulation. So it's to me, if I was a Stalin type, I would want to cultivate a society that has a lot of acceptance, because to me that'd be a very easy thing to manipulate.
And from what I learned from Chase, it's not really about emotional maturity as much as the reward system and punishment system you were given as children. So how you were rewarded and punished is going to dictate which of those needs are dominant in you. And if you
Mm.
just happen to be in a family where acceptance, maybe you're from a very large family and like doing stuff, in the large family unit was considered almost a survival mechanism that is programmed into you at such a core fundamental level. It's very difficult to reprogram those needs as an adult. And we all
Mm.
have them. There's six dominant needs, and we all have them to some degree. Some people are just better at letting those needs kind of drive the car versus taking some kind of more objective perspective on some stuff. So
Hmm.
it's
Makes
interesting.
sense.
Belief stuff is really powerful.
It really is. I think the reason why I think of it as emotional maturity, and this doesn't, to me, this is an overlap of what you just shared, which is um, these are emotional triggers, and those things influence our behavior. And until we recognize that that's actually happening, and in my mind, mature to the point where we realize, oh, I keep doing X, Y, or Z because I was conditioned to do that growing up, because mom and dad either gave me a carrot or a stick, or that I have this childhood wound, or that there's some other type of reward for doing certain behavior, and I continue to, I'm addicted to X, Y, or Z, and that's why I keep doing it. Well, it's really an emotional need. So waking up to that and then being the provider for that emotional need ourselves, to me, is the process of emotionally maturing. But that's my own take on it.
And the thing that I found fascinating with the human needs stuff is majority of people, and myself until I learned this, was oblivious to the role that those needs played in like adult decisions that I made that I thought I was making thoughtfully and rationally, but in hindsight I realized, oh yeah, that's pretty much just in line with that need that was programmed into you. It's like a fourth grader type thing.
Well, and we convince
So kind of
ourselves that, sorry, I was just going to say,
go
we
ahead.
convince ourselves that we're driven by compassion and love, and when the less sexy version is, oh, maybe I'm really driven by significance. Maybe I want to be really important in the world. Maybe I'm driven to be respected by others. And when you start to uncover those needs, and if you're really honest with yourself, it is quite liberating, because you can start to shift those into more, not that there's anything necessarily inherently wrong with that. It is a need. We do want to feel important. I don't want to not be important. I don't want to be, a nothing burger. But at the same time, um, if you find that you're being driven in ways that are not serving you and serving others, it might be something to look at.
True. And once you're aware of those needs, I can now catch myself more quickly when I find that I am kind of making decisions because of those needs, not necessarily because of a goal or something forward thinking.
Yes, good
Uh,
point.
so, kind of related to beliefs is this idea of predictive programming, which has been a part of our lives since before we could even talk. It's been a technique used in the media as well as entertainment in Hollywood. So, what has your study of belief systems and things like neurolinguistic programming taught you about how Hollywood is used as a tool?
Uh, to me, it goes to what I was suggesting a second ago about creating creating momentum and mass appeal. Um, when a certain previous president came into power, he was known as a community organizer. And if you understand the power of media and Hollywood and pop culture to organize a community, what you're doing is you're learning how to cultivate the needs of the people, and basically, like a sheepdog would, channel the herd in a certain way. So it gives you an incredible amount of power. And these are things that the average citizen, the average person, don't really think about or know about, care about. I geek out on this stuff, but the average person, it's just not in their wheelhouse. It's not in their interest. So it makes people very susceptible to being manipulated. I've actually gone through being the victim of fraud myself. I was conned many years ago, and it was very fascinating, actually, to me. I told the girl that was basically a con artist. She's a professional con artist. I said, if you weren't actually trying to con me, I'd be very interested to get to know you and learn more about how your mind works. I mean, I still was, but I was like, you're trying to screw me over, so I'm gonna have to go after you. But it was that's a whole nother podcast in and of itself. Um, anyway, pop culture and influencers are are community movers, and so if you can ally yourself with a pop star, a celebrity, these people have the heart and mind and the trust and the likability of millions and millions of people. So um, That's why you see politicians, that's why you see corporate mergers or associations and partnerships with people that have access to more hearts and minds. You get there was the famous in the movie the Avengers, Vin Diesel's character, the tree Groot. I believe he got paid
Yeah.
millions and millions and millions of dollars for saying "I am Groot." That's the only thing that character, that tree character, says. Well, why would they pay him millions and millions of dollars? It's because he's now a promoter to his millions of followers to go watch this movie. So it makes sense. It makes financial sense to try to do that. But there's obviously pop culture is a prime uh, heart and mind real estate that you want to capture if you seek to influence the masses, because that's who, statistically speaking, that's who a lot of the masses are following.
So there's been quite a few movies that we've all seen growing up that have kind of futuristic scenarios, like a Terminator 3, Terminator movies, or let's just use that as an example. Do you think predictive programming is put in place to help society think that those things are inevitable and we like collectively manifest those outcomes, or do you think there's a different agenda?
I definitely think there's clearly a pattern that this is more than just maybe predictive programming. That there's maybe some other weird stuff going on, like actual um, uh, not predictive programming, but predictive of the future. Like there's just things that are beyond coincidence that you're going, how the heck did they know about this, that, or whatever. But on the predictive programming side of things, I certainly think that is a thing. And if you have the masses of people all sort of subconsciously just presuming that, well, we're going to have AI, we're going to have these robots that are going to, the machines are going to get strong, more smart than we are. And that's just an inevitable thing. It was in Terminator. It's all in our thoughts. In order for something to manifest in our world, it has to come first from a thought. And if we're all collectively already presuming or assuming that something's going to happen, if somebody has an agenda and they want that to happen, that makes it a lot easier to say, well, it's an inevitable thing in the first place. So it certainly is something that the corporate community knows about, even as simple as product promotion and just putting their products into the movies themselves. They're obviously, creating a tacit approval for that particular product. Oh, Arnold Schwarzenegger uses a Harley motorcycle. It's like, okay, I want to be cool too, and so therefore I'm going to have a Harley. So it's stuff like that that is maybe a little bit more benign on the predictive
Mm-hmm.
programming side, but possibly more nefarious if it's heading in a direction that we wouldn't consciously choose were we given that menu of options.
So, kind of related to that, what's your take on the Simpsons being able to predict things? Is that kind of creepy? Coincidence? What do you think that's up with?
Yeah, I definitely think I think it's fascinating. I don't creepy isn't yet the word I would use to describe it, but it certainly seems like something's up. It certainly seems like there's something beyond coincidence, because the level of accuracy that some of the things that they've um, so-called predicted has well, okay, I'm going to use creepy. It's been a little creepy. um, I haven't been able to verify 100% in the timeline when an episode came out versus a certain incident, but I do know that there
Right.
are a number of ones that the episode came first and then the real life incident came out. I mean, just this is the Simpsons, but just the Ohio train derailment a few months ago, and that they're literally. So for those that don't know, most people probably heard this by now, but there was a Netflix movie about an Ohio
Right.
train derailment that had a chemical spill. They literally shot that, I think, at some time in 2022. There are people in the movie that are extras that became actual victims of the very same thing that happened in the same town. I mean, is that predictive programming, or is that something a little bit deeper and darker? I I don't know the answer to that, but it certainly raises eyebrows. I'll tell you that.
I agree. It's a difficult concept to grasp, like for rational people, but this idea that if enough people believe something, they can collectively manifest that into reality. So if you wanted a bunch of train derailments, get a lot of people to watch a movie about train derailment, and could that happen as a result of that? It sounds a little kooky, but how else are things manifested? Like the idea that things happen randomly is probably less plausible than a bunch of people are collectively envisioning something and bringing it to reality.
Well, it's if you break it down into something a lot more simple for somebody to grasp, which is like no no super fit person sat around thinking about how lazy and fat they are. You have to have the intention and the thought first to have a clear goal and a clear vision to achieve that. And the same could be said for wealth or a lot of other things. And sometimes you'll meet people who can't maintain a relationship or something like that. If you ask them questions and you start to uncover their beliefs, you'll find that their beliefs are very consistent with their manifested reality. So the same would go, would presume if we all collectively had a thought about something, that would make the manifestation of that more likely to happen than not. So it's why it's important that right now we have to take a break from all of the noise and craziness that's going on in the world right now and have a clear vision individually, as a family, as a community, and hopefully collectively as a nation, as a world. What does a bright future look like? And if you think right now, if you don't have an answer for that, ask yourself why, and then ask yourself, do I have a clear vision of what the horror looks like, the economic depravity, the social depravity? Do I have a clear vision of that? Yeah, I got a real clear vision of that. Why is that? Where did that come from? And how come I have to scratch my head a little bit to think about a more of a clear vision? Might be something to think about.
And I agree with you that, and sort of related to that, is that we make decisions that are in alignment with how we see ourselves. So if you have a deep rooted insecurity, you're going to make decisions that align with that. And then the physical results will manifest as a consequence down the road, which is why we are not taught as kids to make sure that our beliefs about ourselves are like ironclad and good. And we end up being criticized and graded and go through all of these very judgmental experiences as kids, told that we're bad and punished and all these things, and that those are programmed into your belief system. And unfortunately, in many cases, when you become an adult, you tend to consistently make beliefs that are in alignment with you being bad, you're not good enough, all these sort of negative things that could, I don't think anyone necessarily intentionally programmed those in to harm you, but that happened. And to overcome that programming is really difficult. And I'm actually a believer that we are on the cusp of some pretty big changes globally that are going to be very good.
Me too.
And I think for you and I, Peter, we've been awake to a lot of these realities about what's been going on politically, geopolitically for a while. But there's a huge percentage of people who have zero idea. And after we kind of cross the line or go through to the other side, a lot of people are going to need their beliefs reprogrammed. And I think anyone like you and I who've been through even just a little bit of belief, NLP, Tony training, will probably be more equipped to help people than we realize.
Hmm. I think so too. It's been a question in the back of my mind for the last, couple of decades as I've been going through this process of learning and growing. And perhaps you have too, where people say, well, why are you doing all this stuff? I mean, it's one thing if you're taking sales training or something for a particular job, but I was going to personal development stuff because I'm fascinated by it and I'm interested in personal growth. I'm interested in being the best version of myself, et cetera. And so a lot of times people are saying, why are you doing all this stuff? And sometimes I have a clear answer, but other times I'm kind of like, I don't really know. I'm just driven to do it. I'm interested in it. And yet now, to maybe look at it through a little bit more of a spiritual lens, it seems certainly that there are people that have been well equipped and well prepared to really get a grasp of this stuff because the masses are coming. People are going to be dealing with a lot of change and turbulence, and they're going to need some support. And how do we make these changes, and the reprogramming, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I was a corporate normie for a long time. I had no idea why you would do these personal development things that always sound kind of kooky to me. And they're a different type of person than me did those things.
Hmm.
And I am grateful that I became an entrepreneur and was terrible at sales and needed lots of sales training, because the benefits of that for me personally were remarkable. Like, I realized there was far more applications of that stuff for me personally than learning how to sell a high ticket coaching offer. Uh, but I had to be awoken to that sort of through a back door, I guess.
Yeah, I when I was learning this stuff in the corporate world, it was for me, I loved it when people said that's ridiculous or it's woo woo or it's what it was like. The more people that didn't really fully understand it, the more valuable it was to actually understand it. So I knew that it had a lot of power to it and it had a lot of potential to. I look at it and I come from a place of like how can I contribute? How can I serve in a way? How can I help uplift people? So to me, it's a tool to enlighten, to inspire, to help others grow. There's a lot of people who use it in other ways that are more sort of self-serving and selfish and manipulative and maybe even nefarious. But I once you start to understand it, you recognize how significant and how powerful it is because we deal with people every single day. So it's easy to kind of fall into the corporate thinking of tactics and strategies and goals and objectives and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, you're calling people, you're meeting with people, you're selling to people, you're working with people. You're working with yourself. And so the better that we understand these natures, the more effective we can be. A real easy one to point to is the five love languages. That was one that kind of took off and that everybody can relate to. And just think of how
Mm-hmm.
much better of a partner you are once you understand, oh, the way that I communicate my love language is different than my partner's. Well, what is your love language? Oh, it's that. Oh, I can love you in that way. It creates better partnerships. It creates better connection and we're able to receive more love in that way. So if you just think of that tiny example, but then you extrapolate that out to, behavior and thinking and persuasion and influence and service, it's pretty significant.
Totally agree. And I think the mistake that I've made and I see others make a lot is assuming that everyone else is like them,
Mm-hmm.
and that whether it's their needs or their love language or whatever area you're delving into, you need to learn how to identify those things in other people and not project your own needs on others, because that can create such conflict as when you assume someone needs or wants the same things you want,
Yes.
because that's rarely going to be the case.
Yeah, there was if anybody's interested in this, I highly recommend checking out. There's a Tony Robbins, he calls them interventions, but there's a video of him the day after uh, that September event many years ago. And there was a Jewish person in the audience and there was an Arab person in the audience. And they were both being very courageously honest with how they viewed the world, and he was able to be the mediator. Tony Robbins was the mediator to bring these two, and it was understanding, oh, how this person sees the world and what are his needs, and then what is the way that this person sees the world and what are his needs, and how do we each get our needs met and also be lovingly challenged in a way to bring these two people together. It's a fascinating thing to see, and to me it points to the potential of human beings that at least aren't here to hurt and destroy. It's we have families we love, but yes, we have our disagreements. So how do we come together? And to me, it was a really fascinating expose of somebody very expertly, lovingly pulling these people together, and the result of which will blow your mind if you haven't seen it. So you should go check that out. We'll plug for Tony Robbins.
I mean, one of the highlights of my life was being in the same room as Tony Robbins. He is truly a remarkable person, and his gifts for exactly what you just explained, helping people walk through things, understanding their beliefs, is he's just unlike any other one on the planet, I think.
I had the pleasure of being a platinum partner of his for a year, and you basically just turn into a Tony Robbins groupie for a year and follow him around and go to all his events. And we even got to hang out at his house and sit in his hot tub with him and stuff. And his naturally hot
Oh, wow.
spring-fed hot tub, yeah, it was pretty cool. But I often say to people, if you haven't been to a Tony Robbins experience, you don't really know Tony Robbins. And I said, this came to me one time. I said, uh, the people are his canvas and love is his medium. And then he very artistically creates these beautiful, quote unquote, interventions where he helps people realize, oh my gosh, my whole life I've been trying to make money when real, deep down I was trying to get the love from my father. It's like these things that you're just like, whoa, it's just mind blowing if you haven't been to something like that. It's really beautiful to see.
That's incredible. I mean, I was at an event with like 5,000 other people, so to have been at his house with a very small group, I'm sure it was incredible. What
Well,
was sort
small
of
for
one of the,
Tony is a couple hundred people, so it was, yeah, you still were amongst the
what
crew.
are the other things that Tony Robbins kind of taught you that stick with you to this day?
Certainly, the human needs was one. I think he sort of um, took what he learned and turned them into his own things. And if I could share those
Hmm.
really quick, because it's so applicable to all of us in our
Sure.
lives. The first one is the need for certainty. We all have a need to be certain about our environment, that there will be food on the table the next day, that we're safe. The next one, ironically, is the need for uncertainty, because if everything's the same every single day, you're going to get bored out of your mind. So you have to have the need for surprise and uncertainty to keep things interesting. The third one is the need for significance, the need to matter, the need to be important. The fourth one is the need for love and connection. We all need to feel a part of something and to feel and also give love. And then the next two, he calls those first four the human needs, and these are more the human slash spiritual needs. So the fifth need is the need for growth, because if you're not growing, you're dying. And the sixth need is the need for contribution, the need to give to something greater than yourself. So if you look at your life, you'll find that there's usually one that's predominant. Like right now, I'm very focused. For example, there's part in my life where I was very focused on significance. I didn't consciously think that, but if I really slowed down and looked at my actions, like, well, why do I want to make $1 million? Why do I want to have this car? Why do I want to whatever? And it gets really subtle if you really dig deep. Why am I wearing the clothes that I'm wearing? Why am I living in the city that I'm living in? Why am I in the job that I'm in? Why am I, you know, in the relationship that I'm in? And so a lot of people unconsciously are driven by that need for significance or acceptance, I think is the one that you were talking about. And they don't necessarily realize it. And this is an operating system that's kind of been conditioned and installed in them that is driving their entire life. And they're not even so they're really not even at the wheel of their own life. So that's very interesting to discover. You'll find that there is that predominant one, and very often there is a secondary one that's there too, where it's like, I'm driven by significance, but I really, would love to be in love. I want connection and love and more friends in my life, or a better partner, or a partner in the first place, or whatever. So those are the six needs that Tony Robbins talks about.
So I it's just funny because my whole life I go back and forth between the certainty and uncertainty, like being dominant. Because there's sort of one's more like safety, security, much must know what's going to happen, versus variety. I'd like to be surprised and have an adventure. And it's just funny how these two things kind of play off. So Chase's is a little bit different, and it's more needs you need from other people, and there is a lot of overlap. So significance is one, but it's more about being respected and admired from other people. Acceptance is a little bit different. That's more about being kind of a peer group, like part of the tribe, and almost like being in a gang of sorts. You
Mm-hmm.
see also there's many professions like firefighters, cops are really kind of part of a team, military. There's an acceptance need in there for them to be kind of part of something. There's also approval needs, which is generally when you need approval from some sort of parent, authority figure. It's more of a private approval necessarily, where significance is admired in the public eye. There is power, which is often people who are bullied as kids feel like if I'm just stronger physically, have bigger muscles, I'll be safer because these people won't beat me up.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a pity need, which is generally I think when kids are neglected, unless there's something wrong, like they only get attention when they're sick or they're hurt, they develop this sort of need to always have something wrong with them because that's the only way that they get attention
Mm.
from other people. And I'm blanking on the sixth one. But when you can learn how to identify those in other people, it can really help you structure relationships in a way that you are giving that person more of what they need. So
It's
that
a
kind of tangent.
awesome at the very least it's an awesome parenting tool, and I use it a lot when I look at my kids, and if something that seems out of whack, or if they're, you know, acting out or something, it's like to just slow down and think about, all right, what do they actually need right now? I know they say they need, you know, their phone back or whatever it is, but what is the deeper psychological, emotional need that they have? It's awesome, and it's fantastic in business when you're talking to a buyer, when you're talking to, you know, somebody else that you're trying to partnership with or whatever. What is their emotional need? It'll blow you away when you start to use these, because you'll find, oh, that's actually what they needed. They didn't need the sale or this or that or whatever. They needed to feel loved. They needed to feel a part of something. Needed, you know, that's such a driver for all of us. So it really is a eye-opening thing when you start to grasp it.
You just remind me. So Chase's sixth need is need to be seen as intelligent.
Mm,
And that is something I try to be conscious of with my child. Does very well in school because if you're programmed as a kid, which I was, that you'll be fine in life as long as you get good grades, it can make that a dominant need that doesn't always serve you in the long run. So there's more to life than your
interesting.
report card. All right, so I want to talk about something a little bit forward thinking, maybe a little controversial. I've spent a lot of time recently talking about this. So I'm kind of curious on your take. But this is the idea that we are going to wake up one day and be in a NESARA world, which is where the current financial system that we have is no longer in place. And the countries of the world move back to asset backed money, specifically gold backed money. We get rid of corrupt institutions like the IRS, and move away from income tax, which many believe is unlawful, towards like a flat tax that's based on consumption and doesn't penalize people for being productive. There's also some things that would return us to constitutional law and kind of dismantle this idea that the United States is a corporation and not the republic, the country that we've led to believe it is. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on this concept of NESARA, and do you think it's something that's going to happen?
Uh, I hope something like that happens. I think we need to return to some stability. I think what we have right now is very unstable. As stable as some people think it is, I'm not convinced that it is. And I think stability comes from, at least in our human experience, when you think of a asset-backed currency, I think you can trace every massive, large-scale corruption back to unsound money. I think one of the reasons why our founding fathers had gold and silver as the only legal tender was because it provides a possibly necessary shackle to us human beings to not have this blank check that we can, you know, go do whatever we want with. And that's what we're seeing right now. Frankly, that's what we've seen with every fiat currency, is it gives the creators of that currency or that debt carte blanche to just do whatever they want. There's no restriction, there's no accountability. So an asset-backed currency, in my opinion, would probably be a huge step in the right direction to curtailing a lot of the corruption and just absolute insanity that's happening in the world right now. And it forces people to have to work within they have to be accountable to the finite amount of asset that's available for that. So I think that there's a lot of positive things behind that. I think it's probably at this point even necessary. We're starting to see other people in the world start to move to a gold-backed currency. And what's interesting is you'll see that capital likes stability. And so we're starting to see capital move in that direction. We're starting to see other nations start to say, yeah, we want to be a part of this too. If you look at the BRICS nations and whatnot, some of their counterparts, what they're doing is they're providing that stability in an asset-backed currency, and that's attractive to people who want to have some certainty, the need for certainty in their finances. So I think that that's definitely coming. We may go through some turbulence to get there as the power players are trying to play their chess pieces to see who's going to be the holders of, you know, that asset-backed currency, or the creators of it, or the regulators of it, et cetera. So I definitely think that that's coming. You had a second part to that question, which I forget off the top of my head, but
Well, there's also some other kind of bigger policy things about the U.S. being a corporation, whether
mm,
we remove that corporation from our lives and restore the republic. and move to a different system like a flat tax instead of the quite corrupt income tax system.
Yes, you had mentioned that there's this notion out there that we need to get back to constitutional law, et cetera. And what I'm starting to realize is that we actually never left it. And you might be going, well, how do everything that we have right now is corruption. There's so much corruption in our system right now. And part of my understanding right now is the uncovering of what you talk about, the U.S. corporation, and how that provided basically a false foundational layer that a lot of the corruption that we're seeing in our world today is built on that false layer. So when you realize that that's actually happening and you learn how to untangle yourself from it, and more specifically, how to uncontract yourself from the engagement with the corporation, you actually realize, oh, the rights that I have, the constitutional rights that I have, the frankly spiritual rights, the natural common law rights that I have as a human being on this planet never left me. I actually unknowingly waived them when I contracted into arrangement with the corporation. So what's happening right now is there's a huge surge. There's a growing momentum of people that are becoming aware of this, and they're starting to learn how to uncontract themselves with the fictitious entity that they thought was the government of the United States of America, and it isn't. It is a corporation. And as they're untangling from that, they're recognizing and frankly reclaiming and recognizing the private rights that they have and that they've always had. They just didn't know. They didn't know it, and they didn't know how to claim them, and they didn't know that jurisdiction was even available. So as people are starting to do this, they're realizing that they can actually unplug from the system and let it do what it needs to do. And if it needs to implode on itself, which it looks like it's trying to do, then go for it. But I'm not going to be a part of it.
How do you do that? How do you uncontract yourself from the corporation?
So that's what I'm learning right now. This might be a safe time to plug my show. I actually recently had on a very colorful character. His name is Brandon Joe Williams on my podcast not too long ago. It was the last episode I published recently, where he explained how the corporation known as the United States came to be, how we unknowingly contracted into it. So when you ask yourself, well, what contracts are you talking about? Well, if you look at your driver's license, if you look at your social security card, if you look at any type of license, a marriage license, a fishing license, why are we getting licenses to do something that we have a right to do in the first place? Did you know that in the Constitution, you have a right to travel? You don't have to get permission for a privilege. The second that you contract into getting a driver's license, you are essentially saying, I don't really know that I have a right. I'm not exercising that right. And therefore I am now asking on my knees, please, can I have the privilege to drive? And please don't punish me and take that privilege away. Let me pay for all the, emissions tests and all these other things I need to do to get that license. When you realize and recognize, oh, I have the right to travel simply by being a citizen of my state, then why am I asking for permission? Why am I asking for that privilege? I'm just going to exercise my ability to travel. And there's a whole process of doing that. I'm not an expert on that yet, but it is something that I've been very interested about, and I have been learning about it. Apparently, you can go to the Department of Transportation, get a DOT number, the Department of Transportation number, and you don't have to enter a credit card. You don't have to do anything. You can get a DOT number, and it's my understanding that now people are driving with no tags on their car, no license plates, and they've made their own tags that basically says, here's my DOT number and private citizen, I think it may say, or something like that. But you are now removing yourself from the commercial engagement with the United States corporation. But I want to just give a little caveat to all of that, which is to say, there are people that are out there that are learning this, and then they're going and they're throwing it in people's faces, in cops' faces, and in lawyers' faces, and all this. I ask that we do this measurably, with politeness, with concern and care for your fellow American. We're all going through this craziness together, and the average cop, the average lawyer, they're not aware of this, just like you and I haven't been aware of this stuff. So I actually often see that as an opportunity to share with them, like, this is what I'm learning. This is, I know it sounds crazy, but go look it up yourself, do your own research, figure it out for yourself. And a lot of times you'll find that those people are just as open to this as you might be. So.
And do you see this as different than the process of becoming a state national?
It's my understanding that it is different. I'm not as clear yet in my mind as to where those differences are. It's also my understanding that you need to be very careful about how you do this, because you may entrap yourself in ways that might be difficult for you in the future. So you really want to know what you're doing when you do it. I don't have an answer for that at this point.
So there's another path that I've been sort of looking into, which is not the state national route, which is a little bit like playing their game. It's saying, I'm going to now create these affidavits and disavow from your system. There's two other possible things, and I'm not advocating that anyone do these things. I haven't really done them yet. They're just ideas I'm still formulating. One is you just make the sort of mental decision, like, I'm out. Like, I'm not playing the game anymore, and you just stop participating in a lot of these games, these rules that we consented to without really understanding the agreements. There's also a more spiritual side where you can make a new contract with God or whoever your spiritual being is, and you disavow these agreements, these contracts that you signed with the corporation, and simply say that I just now publicly avow that I no longer am going to be legally bound to any of these contracts. Because if you, as you were listing out, Peter, there's a lot of them that none of us had any idea. And they even go back to when we were born, and our birth certificates have been traded as they call chattel for loans being taken out against us and against our potential earning power. So it's quite a fascinating thing. And if you're watching this, this is the first time you've heard about this, just know that it's a pretty big rabbit hole. And I hope that collectively we have more open discussions about how to exit this system. I think we were all shown the movie The Matrix for a reason, and that there is a great analogy behind there with, if you want to leave the Matrix and not play that game anymore, you do have some options that we're still sort of trying to figure out what the best ones are.
Fun fact about the Matrix: did you know the scene where the very beginning of the movie when Neo gets taken by the agents and they take him to a corporate office room, and they're, at the time in the movie you're like, oh, these are FBI agents and they're after him for something, and they slam a bunch of folders down on the paper. Now, and remember, the Matrix came out in 1999. In that folder, a little piece of paper slides out, and it's upside down to you, the viewer, but it has a photocopy of Neo's passport. Do you know? Have you heard this yet?
No.
The expiration date on that passport. Take a wild guess what that expiration date is, knowing that this came out in 1999.
Is it going to be like sometime this year?
No, which would be a good guess, but it actually was 9/11/2001. Which I find to be very interesting. I'm not saying that that's definitive of anything. I just find that very interesting, that the very day that a lot of us can kind of historically look back to as the beginning of waking up from the Matrix is the very day that Neo's passport expired, that they show and reveal in the movie itself. So I'm sure it's just a coincidence.
Yeah.
All right, I'll say I'm a 99% sure, but it is an interesting one nonetheless to just think about.
There are some people who believe that the 9/11 events are tied to NESARA, and that was the first time that was intended to be implemented, and we were all distracted, obviously, by a horrific set of events. And
so the events were the distraction for the possible coming of the NESARA stuff, or is that somehow connected to leading us to it?
It was like a train derailment.
Interesting. Yeah, there's the more I'm digging, the more I'm finding that a lot of these things are connected. We think that they are these independent things that are happening all over the world, and when you start to follow the money, when you start to look at some other things, you realize, oh, these things are intimately interwoven. It's really, it starts to make you question your belief systems or what you
Mhm.
actually believe to be, might expand your beliefs to to explore some things that previously would have been a little bit crazy, but then you start to, the evidence is right in front of you, so you go, oh, well, maybe I don't know it all.
My newer beliefs are that many things that appeared to happen spontaneously were actually planned out for a very, very long time in advance,
Yes, you've
decades.
you've helped me in that regard. The Creature from Jekyll Isle was just, I mean, it's like it spells it out.
And the other thing from Jekyll Island that I now look at through the lens in every conflict now is that the banking cabal, they play both sides. And
Hmm.
it's brilliant because it's very hard to lose when you play both sides. You also can manufacture all sorts of conflict that create destruction, and then you come in with these loans to repair the destruction.
Yep.
And every war, for the most part, that has physical fighting, stuff gets wrecked, and somebody's got to get borrow money to get that stuff rebuilt and repaid. And it's been an incredibly profitable strategy for that institution for a long time. I also was under the belief for a long time that there were many banks and have recently been corrected that there's really one bank and every other bank is a subsidiary of the one bank. In the same way that we think there's many, many countries where really there is one corporation, the City of London, and all the other countries of the world are subsidiaries of the City of London, which is crazy.
It's mind blowing. Yeah, it really is nuts. I
We've had
haven't
this one
done the
world
homework
government for
yet.
a long time.
Yeah, yeah.
You what?
It's how much I haven't connected all of those dots just yet, but I don't disbelieve it. It's just I've connected some of them, but I haven't mapped all of that out just yet. But it is quite the rabbit hole.
So the last rabbit hole I wanted to go into is sort of a juicy one. So, what we're experiencing now, the last couple of years, very much feels like a war, and many like to refer to it as a spiritual war. And you've had some experience with spiritual war and a particular thing that you haven't told me yet, so I get to hear this for the first time. So tell me about how you met the devil.
Yeah, I grew up in a Christian household. I'll give that disclaimer, but we never really
Okay.
did. We weren't the subset of Christianity that talks about heaven and hell. It wasn't. There was no, you're going to hell if you do this, or you're going to go to heaven if you do that. There was no judgment day. It's a little bit of a different belief system where um, God is love, and that is all. And that was the totality of it.
Okay.
So I preface me telling you this little bit of story by saying, never in my life did I talk about the devil? Did I acknowledge that there was a devil or anything like that? Um, I had started to get into plant medicine as a way of mind expansion. Um, and I was interested. I'm a big Joe Rogan fan. I listen to his podcast a lot, and he kind of got me on to thinking about plant medicine in a new way. And I grew up in that Christian household, very conservative, sort of sheltered household of that. I learned that marijuana was the gateway drug, and if you do marijuana, then you're going to next day you're going to be addicted to meth and your whole life is ruined. That was the clear and only path that you could go if you did any kind of drugs. I mean, that was kind of
Okay.
the story I was told about drugs in a nutshell. But it wasn't until my adult years, after some belief systems were shattered in my world, where my mother passed on and some other things happened, that shook me a little bit, to where I was like, not unstable, but just recognizing that what I believe to be true isn't the full truth, or even true in the first place. And it put me on a path of exploration. And so that ultimately led me to um, being willing to consider plant medicine. So I dabbled a little bit, and I remember first doing it a little bit and then being lovingly pissed at my mother, who has been since passed, because I remember thinking like, that that's what we were so afraid of. That was a beautiful experience. That didn't, and I don't feel addicted to it. I don't feel, I think I will caveat all of this by saying an addictive personality it can be absolutely addicting to go down this path, and I'm not recommending it for anybody per se. But anyway, as I started to explore this space a little bit more, I was invited to go to an ayahuasca ceremony with some original Huni Queen Amazonian tribe shamans, which was an opportunity I didn't want to pass up. So
Where was
I
it?
went. What's that?
Where was it?
It was in an unincorporated part of California. There's certain parts in in the
Okay.
country where they're able to do it, and so I was invited to join. And it was the first time that these tribe members were able to come up to the States, and they did like a 3 month tour. These were original tribe members. I mean, the mother was a politician in her tribe, a very significant politician in her tribe, and her son was the up and coming chief. He was being groomed to be the next chief. So it was a very powerful mother son duo that led this whole thing. And I didn't know a ton about this. Was my first experience, so I didn't know a ton about it. Most of the other people there had been through it many times. But it involves a lot of music that they hand played, guitar and flute and some other things. Excuse me. But anyway, the plant medicine has a very profound impact in your psyche, to say the least. And it is a very difficult thing to do. A friend told me before I went to it, he said, you need to train for this like you're going to the spiritual Olympics, because this is a very powerful medicine. So I took that to heart. You want to eat a certain way, show up in a very prepared way, mentally, emotionally, physically. And so anyway, without going too far down the rabbit hole on some of the other things that happen, with respect to meeting the devil. So what happens is you go through a process physically where you may have heard that there's a big purging part of the process. And I, I'll tell you about the purge story maybe another time, but you go through the purge. It's very uncomfortable. It's just, I mean, being sick is uncomfortable. It's not the best feeling in the world. So you go through that, but then on the other side of that, it sort of pulls you. It's very uncomfortable, but it pulls you out of your ego. It pulls you, and I define ego by the five senses. If you think of this in terms of, I identify by all of this data that's coming in through my five senses of what I see, what I smell, taste, feel, and hear. I know myself as Peter that's sitting in this couch that's talking to Molly. I'm on my computer. It's like all of this data is consciously, and a lot of which is subconsciously, saying this is who you are, where you are, and what you're doing. And what happens is it pulls you out of that to where that data is no longer applicable at all. And then you have this recollection of, wait, I'm not seeing, thinking, I'm not in this physical entity anymore, but I'm still conscious. And you realize that who you actually are is the thought and feeling of who you are. This is why this is a spiritual battle. This is why everything that we've been talking about this entire show is so profoundly important. It's easy to dismiss or easy to just say, whatever. It's so significant, and I didn't recognize how profoundly significant it is until I went through this experience. But anyway, as that pulls you out of it, the way that I've been describing it to people is it forced me into the frequency of knowingness. So when you think about, if you're spiritual at all, and or if you've ever prayed, if you've ever even hoped or had faith or whatever, there is a subconscious acknowledgement that I am here and I'm praying or hoping or having faith to this other energy, this other entity, this God, whatever, that I'm separate from. And when I went through this experience, I was in the frequency of knowingness. So any thought that I had instantaneous understanding of it. It was wild. It was like there was no, hey, is this right? There was no tennis match where I'm hitting a ball and there was a response. It was any thought. It was instant clarity. It was very, very profound. So the thought that I had, knowing me and everything that we've been going through, one of the thoughts I had was, what's going on in the world today? And the second I had that thought, I saw the devil, and he was laughing maniacally.
Did he
And
look like a person?
yes, and this is my personal belief, but I think it looks like what I think it looks like.
Okay.
So I think people experience what they think life is. Quick tangent, I've been listening to a lot of near-death experiences, and it's very interesting how people experience what they've been told about the afterlife I watched an old lady, the sweetest old lady, and she said, I went to hell. And she gave her whole description of hell. And then she came back, she lived, and she's telling the story. And she said, then I realized that I went to hell because I believed that there was a judgment day and that I was going to go to hell. So that's what she experienced. It's like, talk about programming, talk about,
Okay.
what you have in your thought is kind of where you go. So anyway, so I saw the devil, and he was laughing maniacally at just all the chaos that's going on in the world right now, all the corruption and the mayhem and quite frankly, the genocide that's happening. And it was just this sort of evil, maniacal laugh. Now, I have to say that I didn't feel frightened. It was simply observation. I was just simply going, it was like, let me show you the truth of what's going on. It was also revealed to me, at least in that state of consciousness, that this is the biggest spiritual conflict that this planet has ever seen. Uh, and so I thought that was very fascinating. So that was the first night.
Okay.
Next day, we'd go and we did another ceremony. Same thing. I purged. That was a whole nother experience. I get to this sort of frequency of knowingness again, and I sort of I had the thought, uh, who needs the most help right now? And actually, I won't tell you that story. That's a tangent. So I was thinking again about what's going on in the world, and this time, well, part of my reasoning for asking uh, who needs the most help actually led me to a group of people who may have believed that the jab was the right thing to do and now realized that maybe the jab was not the right thing to do, and they might be suffering greatly because a child or a loved one or somebody that they love dearly is suffering, and there's really no outlet for them because they've kind of backed themselves into a social corner where nobody, you have a bunch of people saying, see, I told you, and a bunch of other people saying, no, it's still the right thing to do, and there's nobody really empathizing for them. So that was kind of revealed to me. And then I asked the question, okay, well, what do they need to do? And the steps came into my mind. First, they need to acknowledge, uh, what's the saying? Give the devil his due. That's what came into my head. And it was like on repeat. You got to give the devil his due. You got to give the devil his due. And as I thought about it, I was really sitting there thinking, as we acknowledged even earlier in this conversation, there is a lot of intelligence, very sophisticated, very high level intelligence that's going on right now. Yes, for darkness, yes, for corruption and evil, but it's incredibly and extremely intelligent. And I was sitting there sort of just in that wave of acknowledgement that this is a very intelligent force, whatever you want to call it, that we're up against. And as I thought that, I saw the devil again. This time it was in full body, and he was like floating maybe 20 yards away from me. And he wasn't laughing this time. This time he looked at me and he put his hand on his heart and he said, "Thank you for seeing me." And I was like, I didn't know what to think about that. And I've reflected a lot on that since then because it was a little jarring to think about. It started to make me think, like, is there divine purpose? I hate to say this because I know this is not a very, very popular thing to say, but I'm just being honest. Is there a divine purpose maybe in the devil? And if you think about how much we've grown in the past couple of years, think of how much of a different person you are for the better. Is it because you've been aspiring to do good things, or has there been a powerful like motivation to push you forward and to find deeper truths, to deeper understand yourself? Is it possible that some of this stuff, I'm not going to say it's God by any chance, but is it possible that there is at the very least purpose in it or value out of the suffering, out of the chaos, out of the evil? Anyway, it got me to think about that on a much deeper level. I still think about that a lot. And so that was my
Wow.
experience with the devil. And again, this is not anything that I've ever experienced before. It's not something that I sought out. It's not a belief system that I had. It was, oh, you want to take the red pill? Okay, here you go. Massive spiritual conflict. Let me introduce you to who's on the other end of this. And yeah, I mean, it's just my experience. Whether you believe that or not is up to everybody else to decide for themselves. But that's what I went through.
Wow, that's an amazing story. I guess it does make sense to me that, you can't really appreciate the good times if you've never had tough times. So,
I think there's something to that. If we are spiritual beings that are infinite, is it possible that we come to this experience, selectively forget who we are, where we came from, and experience the illusion of separation and suffering and fear and evil so that we can better understand our truer nature once we wake up from this dream? Is that possible? I think it's possible.
also, the dream, simulation, whatever you want to call it, would be kind of boring if everything was just easy and good all the time. You just sort of sit
How
there like,
how non-boring have the last few years been?
this is true. This is true. So, Peter, tell us a little bit about what you're up to, and if people want to follow you or connect with you or kind of learn more from you, what's the best way to do that?
Certainly, I'm fascinated by psychology. I'm fascinated by what makes people tick, and I'm fascinated by people who are very heart driven and wanting to contribute and help others. So I started a podcast. It's called Wired for Impact. And the guests that I have on the podcast are people that I genuinely feel are quote unquote wired for impact. You don't have to agree with everybody that I have on the podcast, but I seek people who are trying to make a difference, who are elevating others, and who are trying to contribute good in the world. I like to shine the spotlight on them. That's why I've had you on my podcast a couple of times, of course. You can find that podcast at impactnow.com. Again, the name of the podcast itself is Wired for Impact. So if you search for that on Spotify or Apple or Google Play or what have you, it's Wired for Impact. But everything that you need to find about that is at my website, impactnow.com. You can also find me on Instagram at Wired for Impact. And I will say, if you're concerned that the future is not going to be the same as it has been in the past, if you're concerned that things are changing and shifting, and you're not sure if you're really fully prepared yet or not, I created a free report that you can get if you go to my website at Impact Now. The report is called Get Prepped, and it'll help you think through everything that you need to essentially create independence from the system so that you can stand on your 2 feet if they decide to change our currencies, if the grocery stores are bare for a couple of days or a week or whatever. Can you navigate that? What if your water goes out, your electricity, your energy? What about crypto and some of the things going on there? It has a lot of great beginner information for people who are interested in preparing for a possible storm, which looks like is coming our way in terms of economic and or maybe even geopolitical. So we will see. But if you're interested in that, you can get that free report at impactnow.com.
Awesome. I'll put those links in the description. Well, thank you very much, Peter. This was fascinating. We covered quite a few topics, and the story at the end was, my mind's blown from that one.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
All right.